It's Walter Parks. That's a new one that I worked up. It's called Holler and Joe from the Okie Finokie series, and uh, it's a tricky little thing because it was originally done on a fiddle, and like I'm always doing, I derive some fascination out of taking the songs that were originally manifested on other instruments, fiddles, banjos, especially organs and pianos, and trying to translate them to guitar. I don't quite have that one yet, but that's what I beg of your patience in when you tune in to me, and I'm kind of working a lot of things out. It's one of the reasons that I like doing these shows. It's a little tricky to get up on a Sunday morning because I get up real early to try to prepare for them. But anyway, sorry I've missed the last three episodes. Just on the road. I was working in New York, and it's just it's really not. We've tried to do it. I don't like to do it on my cell phone and all that stuff. It's too much technical stuff for me to worry about. I kind of lose my interest, and if there's too much distraction from the music, it's not worth doing. So, but anyway, it's good that you're back. Good that we're together, and it's Walter Parks coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri, and this is my studio. I've never quite done an angle like this. I don't think exactly like this. At least you can see my picture in the back that Kern Weissman and Becky Hoffman gave me of the Vault Allure, which sadly we're not going to do this year. The city of Jersey City needs to do some repairs to the space to really make it up to standard for public safety and everything, and to actually have us to enable us to have a little bit easier time in presenting it, and they just kind of haven't stepped up and done their end of it, even though it was promised for years. So we just are not going to put ourselves through that. But we're going to miss doing the Vault Allure this year, and it would be perfect to do it. But, that's one of the things that I'm really thinking about so much more these days, is that just, even though I do these Facebook broadcasts and YouTube broadcasts and so on, which ostensibly they're free, it's just it just churns me to the core when I feel like local governments don't realize what the arts are doing to the doing for the local economies. And but anyway, I don't want to go into that rant. Y'all know the deal. I may not always do these things. I'm thinking about doing an evening series on Sunday, or a Sunday early evening series, not very late. So sometimes I might not do the morning, but I might do something that Kern Weissman and I named the single malt sermons. And I may do those in the evening for instance, if I play a late gig on Saturday. I'm starting to gig a lot more, and I just won't be able to get up and really do the show that I want to do. So maybe on an early Sunday evening we can all do a single malt sermon together, and we'll have a single malt scotch that we share, and maybe listen to a sermon. I've been doing that so much lately. Just going to old record stores. I go to Vintage Vinyl here in St. Louis, and man, I'm pointing back here to one. This is one that's by. I love this one. I'm not going to play it today, but this is one by Reverend Jesse White, and the prayer that was offered too late. It's fantastic, and as these pastors are wont to do, they whip you into a frenzy by the there's two sides to a record. So the record, both sides of it, is all one sermon, and I don't need the music. I can do the music part of it. So that's what we're going to do at the single malt sermons. If we're gonna play these sermons, lift up the needle, talk about it a little bit. I might play a song. I'll be the music. but the preacher's going to whip us into a frenzy, and it's something I want to try because I can't always wake up for these things. But since I've seen you last, we had a significant death in the rock and roll world, and that was Gary Brooker died. I think just last week, and Gary was the singer of Procol Harum, and so I feel like doing a song that I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, and let's see if I can get it interesting for you. Turn cartwheels across the floor. I was feeling pretty seasick. The crowd called out for more. The room was humming harder, and the ceiling flew away. But the waiter drawed a tray, and so it was that later, as the miller told his tale, as his face at first turned ghostly, turned to whiter. She said there was no reason, secrets plain to see, so I stumbled through my playing card. People I just could not let her be, one of the 16 best of virgins for the coast. And although my eyes were open, people, they might just as well be closed. And so it was the letter Shaded Pale. It's Walter Parks. That was my version of a Procol Harum tune. The singer of that group died this past week, Gary Brooker. I only got to see him once, and he was playing with Eric Clapton in the early '80s, and that was it was wonderful. And nobody would really know. Most people didn't know Gary Brooker's name. So when Eric kind of said, "And now we're going to have Gary Brooker sing a song for you," and even when they started into the chords of, everybody just thought, well, just like knocking on heaven's door or something. Eric's getting ready to play a cover, and then when Gary started singing, you knew that was the real guy. So it's pretty cool. I hope you're enjoying the sounds. And I love playing acoustic. I'm going to be doing a couple of acoustic shows coming up. Some of my favorite places, Florida, of course, where I'm from, Jacksonville, and St. Louis, where I now live. St. Louis, I'm playing this coming Friday night, which is March 4th, at a place called the Focal Point. It's a new room for me, and kind of excited about it. It's an acoustic room, so I'll try as much as possible to keep it on this acoustic thing, but I bring my delays and everything because I see no reason to do a reenactment. I like to kind of give this stuff a little contemporary twist a little bit. And then Saturday, March 12th, I'm going to be in Jacksonville, Florida, my hometown. And I'll be playing a room I haven't played for a while called Mudville, and it's a listening room on the tour circuit of acoustic musicians and that kind of thing. My old buddy Ray Lewis is in charge of promoting those shows, and that's going to be cool. I'm hoping that I can bring some folks out. I know there's going to be a big festival down in St. Augustine that weekend, but we'll see. Where's that? Oh yeah. So the reason I'm going to Florida is I'm interviewing the last living male inhabitant of Northern European descent, if you will, in the Okefenokee Swamp. It's Bill Chesser is now 90 years old, and he has agreed to let me interview him for the second time. And I got some great stuff. The first time I sat with him, Margot and I sat with Bill and his wife in Folkston, Georgia. And, these are treasures. These are folks who really did that old school kind of surviving and living off the land. And it's funny, Bill's father was the last, head of household, so to speak, to live out in the swamp. And they chased the family out of there in, I think, 1958 or so, which is when I was born. And Bill's mother had long left the swamp. Not long. She left in advance of her husband, I think. I think the story goes is that the husband was a holdout. He loved living out there, And the wife moved to Folkston or Waycross. He said, I'm getting out of the swamp. I don't want to live out here anymore. But he was into it, and he stayed to the bitter end. And but the Chesser family gave us these wonderful hollers that were recorded in the in the early 40s, actually. There was a botanist and a naturalist named Francis Harper who came down from the north. And as many did who exposed the Okefenokee Swamp to the rest of the world. And Francis Harper borrowed some recording equipment from the Library of Congress, and he was there were early Edison type recorders because he's making records. You can tell by the recordings that there's scratchy sounds, and the needle goes the mastering needle kind of sometimes they lift it up and put it back down. It's really kind of rustic, but it preserved this wonderful music. And you might wonder why am I so fascinated with this swamp music? And I'm fascinated because it's really outside of just going out there in the woods and camping overnight and trying to kind of feel the essence of how those folks used to live as much as you can on a weekend camping trip, which I used to do, by the way, a lot. It, the music is another great way to kind of just get in your bones and blood a little bit of how they used to live. And so, for instance, that last song, the first song that I started, not the last one, the first one was a song called Holler and Joe. I'm not sure why they call it Holler and Joe because it's all about fiddling. There's no mention of hollering in the song. So my rendition is going to be called Fiddlin' Joe. And as per usual on those Southeast Georgia songs, the accents are so thick I can't really decipher them. But I'm hoping that Mr. Bill Chesser can help me out with some of that. What do you ask a man who grew up in the swamp and hollered on a recording in 1941 through 44, and as a young teenage boy, and who never went back to that kind of life, and who went on to leading a fairly secure life and comfortable life in the modern world? What do you ask a 90-year-old man now? I would love to get y'all's questions on that. I mean, one of the things I really want to know is what, what did Hollerin, what if anything did Hollerin do for them? Like, in terms of, did it make them feel a certain way? I mean, I know that hollering was kind of a practical way of communicating. They would holler and they'd say, yeah, I've been coming home. I've been on one of the other islands. I've been out for a couple of days. So I'm approaching the house and here's my holler. You guys don't shoot me. So that was a practical kind of thing. But there was also, I know for myself when I'm going to put my loop back in it. If I go, now that was my version of that kind of a hollering thing and that drone I created with the slide on my guitar. That feels good to me. It just it opens me up. It says, good morning, here I am. I'm out in the swamp and I can picture myself out there singing, which I have done. But what did it do for them? Was there ever a sense of recreation about that? Was there ever a sense of, like, I am sort of one with my environment? Did the hollers did the environment kind of give you those hollers? Did the pine trees and the palmettos and the rattlesnakes and the moccasins and the gators, did that kind of help to convey the spirit of those hollers? And the other thing I just want to know is, in all of those years of surviving out there, just, was there any sense that, it's the northern storytellers who romanticized the concept of, or the act of living in the swamp. They were fascinated about how connected the people who lived in the swamp were to nature, and how aware they were of the changes of nature. The way the birds would kind of just fly away and cause a great amount of confusion right before darkness, and they would sleep in the trees on their own, and then they would they would make these calls in the early morning so they could orient each other. In other words, they could find the birds that were partnering birds. They made these calls so they could find each other, but they slept alone at night. How did they find that out? How did they learn that? And so they learned it by observing. And if they observed that, imagine what else they observed. I want to read for you some really. I don't know if I have my book here. It's probably downstairs. That's great preparation for me. It's a little brown. It might be on the bad stand, but I think it's a brown book that might be. It says the Okefenokee or something. Okay. But I'm going to read from another book while Margot's reaching for. Yeah, there's some comments here. Good morning, hi, Kristen. Oh, I see. That's a good one. Kristen Barner asked, "What was your a question that I could ask of an old timer, in this case, Bill Chesser, who's now 90 years old and proudly proclaimed that it was so cute the other day. He says, Walter, I'm 90. I made it to 90. And he can't believe it. And Kristen was suggesting that maybe I could ask what was his favorite memory that makes him smile and his heart feel glad. I will do that. I will do that. Here's a book that I bought out in the Okefenokee at the gift store or whatever. And the book really kind of changed my life. It's I learned so much about the way folks did things and the music that was played out there. Here's just a couple of little things. And a lot of people might be thinking in the modern day, these are just a bunch of old white rednecks out there, and they're all probably just a bunch of racists and everything. I mean, people have their own ideas about these folks. I'm not even going there with that. It's just, but I will tell you this. Here's something interesting. I have no reason to believe that any of these folks were racist, and the writer Francis Harper, he documented that Hamp Mizell, who was the bard of the Okefenokee and whose songs I have transcribed, that Hamp Mizell knew songs from what he called the slavery days came to me as a surprise. Like most rural counties of this region, Charlton County was composed almost entirely of non-slaveholding yeoman farmers. The county was formed in 1854 from the inland portion of plantation country. So plantation country, or in this case, they call it Plantation County. So the Plantation County was kind of split up, and the plantation counties were considered the eastern border counties. And a lot of times when we think of plantations down south, we think of cotton, but these were rice plantations. So he's referring to St. Mary's, Georgia, and the rich lowlands that provided much of Georgia's rice in the antebellum days. The original settlers, I don't like that word, but that's what he wrote. The original settlers of the Okefenokee had no first-hand knowledge of slavery, but they were loyal to the Confederate cause, and many quickly enlisted. And also, come to find out that the Okefenokee swamp was sort of a refuge for soldiers who decided they didn't want to be soldiers anymore. They would head to the swamp and kind of try to disappear. And there's islands all over the swamp that people grew crop on and raised livestock and that sort of thing. And what was really, really fascinating to me is that it has been documented that the Seminoles, who were there for, into the early 1800s, those that were willing to talk about it said that they had found traces of Native American populations that were that had been there years before them. And when the white folk came through, and in places, unfortunately, they would dig up the Indian mounds, the burial mounds, they found these huge skeletons. These human beings were 6 feet and over. So the people that predated the Seminole out in the Okefenokee Swamp they were just very, very large people, judging by their bones and so on. But it's just fascinating, and one of the things I want to do before I get too old is to go out there and camp on some more of those islands, if possible. I've only been to Billy's Island, and I've been there many times. Why don't I play an Okefenokee song? But I'm going to have to tune my guitar. No, I'm going to play a hymn, because we call this Hymns and Hollers. I call this Hymns and Hollers. And this is one that they used to sing out there in shape note style. It's an old Civil War song called Idemea, which was also known as Am I Born to Die? Body down, and must my trembling spirit fly into a world unknown? A land of deepest I'll be human thought, the dreary regions of the dead, when all things are forgotten. And so from earth I what will become of me? Eternal happiness or dread? What then my portion be? Eternal happiness or dread? Must then my portion be? That was a hit in 1861. I'm really staying current here, but why not? We all think of where we're going to go in the by and by. It is a hit. It's a hit right now. It's a hit in our minds, and I know I play it a lot, but it was as I was playing. Every time I play a song, or when I'm working on a song, as in the case of Hollering or Fiddlin' Joe, every time I play it, I get closer to maybe what I would call the original intent, and I start to understand it. And I think that's true of life. It's true of spending time with people. Every day that you really dedicate yourself to kind of opening up your heart and to trying to just get to know a person and not impose yourself on them, for instance, to try to be on input, as I call it, you learn something. You learn about them deeper, and that's what I do with these songs. And I was just thinking, when I was playing, there's a line in there that says, a land of deep deepest thought, unpierced by human thought. No, yeah, a land of deepest shade, unpierced by human thought. And it occurred to me, that's why they like that song in the Okefenokee. A land of deepest shade, unpierced by human thought, the dreary regions of the dead, where all things are forgot. And there no doubt were areas of the Okefenokee, and it's talked about in this book. If you want to get a really interesting read of the Okefenokee, there's really three main books, and I'll tell you about them. Well, this is number one. This is called The History of the Okefenokee Swamp. This is a hardbound from this is reprinted in 1984, but it was copyrighted originally in 1926 by Hamp Mizell, again, the bard of the Okefenokee. That's my word for him. And a man named Alexander McQueen. I think it was Alexander. He's not the clothing designer, but let's let him be the Alexander. A.S. McQueen. I occasionally underline things in here. I wanted to call something to your attention. Here's a northerner, an intellectual northerner, describing the people who lived in the swamp. And this is 1926 or whatever. In spite of their entire ignorance of the world and total inability to understand anything outside their island, these people were very, very religious, and one of them asked me if I believed in the living God. He goes on to make a bunch of observations about the people who lived in the swamp, and that they could smell a rattlesnake in the swamp. They could trail a smell like dogs, and but there was a really good sort of myth that they kept perpetuating. I'm trying to think of it, and I don't have it underlined. But anyway, it was commented that one of the locals kind of told him is like a Georgia cracker, who they call themselves in delight, dearly delights in telling fairy tales to the Yankee scientists. The Georgia cracker dearly delights in telling fairy tales to the Yankee scientists. And I'm hoping that I'm not considered one of those Yankee scientists. I certainly don't like it when people say that I'm from New York, even though I lived there for most of my adult life. But this is a fascinating read, and it's there's some things I'm searching for. This is a terrible way. Yeah. The pioneer was an honest, God-fearing man, and it has ever been characteristic of the pioneer to respect and protect the last resting place of a human being. And it was sort of an unwritten law among the white pioneers who settled around the swamp to leave these mounds undisturbed. So what happened when the logging companies came through? Companies that were comprised of men who weren't actually living in the swamp, they started to need to cut railroad passages and roads through some of those islands. And if there was a hill in the way, Well, you just got to cut right through the hill. It turned out that one of those hills on Floyd's Island was a huge Indian mound, and it's very sad. Um, but I will just tell you one more thing, and this is essentially in a nutshell what fascinates me about the Okefenokee Swamp. It delights and thrills the heart of anyone who has a spark of the artistic in his nature. The artist can find in this swamp scenes for masterpieces, from the beautiful to the somber. For while there are scenes of unsurpassed beauty, there are others dark, dangerous, and foreboding. And in a nutshell, that's it for me. I mean, I'm really delighted to be going back out there. I don't think I have time on this trip to do some camping out there. They've asked me to maybe provide some music for an exhibit at the Visitor Center, and I'm really thrilled for that. So we're going to be talking about that. But right now, let me see if I can tune this guy. Ooh, it's not intended. I feel like playing an old banjo song that since I was talking about Hamp Mizell. Just give me a second, y'all. I didn't plan to do this. Can y'all hear my dogs breathing down there? I don't know if you can. They're snoring, and I've got two dogs here. I don't know if you can't see them, but they're at my feet on these posh beds that Margot bought for them, American-made beds, and they're the luckiest dogs in the planet. They don't know it. I tell them that when I went to Havana, Cuba, the dogs just fend for themselves. They're completely on their own. They're walking the streets and everything, and people are not mean to them. They feed them every now and then, but the dogs they're just all alone, and I felt so sorry for them. And then our dogs come here, and I mean, I come back to the States and see our dogs just living in the lap of luxury, and they have no idea what their brethren are going through out there in the world. This is one called Catfish, and it was played by Hamp Mizell on a banjo, and let's see if I can do it. See that catfish going upstream, out with the butter, deal for the creek. Caught that catfish by the snout, turned that catfish inside of my beak. Banjo slam, honey, woo! Banjo slam. You wanna go to court? Tell you where to go. one played out in the Okefenokee by an old fiddler and banjo player named Hamp Mizell. Hamp was a tour guide, not a tour guide. He was really a hunting guide. They didn't have tours back then. But the city businessmen, Atlanta businessmen would come down and go all the way to the Okefenokee swamp, and Hamp made money by, Hamp supported himself by taking these guys out on hunting trips and so on to the various islands. And when white men were first getting the lay of the land, so to speak, in the Okefenokee, if they would find one of the islands, there aren't many islands, but if they found an island out there that was a good hunting island, they would try to keep it quiet, and that would, of course, eventually make somebody mad. And the campsite that had been first set up by the discoverers of the island would be destroyed. And I just don't. I hate that about human beings. People are like, well, they got here first. Let's destroy their property because they didn't tell us about this spot. Well, they did the work. They did the work. They came out there. They quote discovered the island, which is a ridiculous concept, but they did the work to figure out where the island was, and let's talk about that for a second. I mean, is that colonization? I'm not going to go there. Well, I am going to go there a little bit, but I mean, for better or for worse, let's say, and this is a microcosm of what's going on and what has gone on in the world, or at least the way I see it. Let's say three guys. They get in canoes, and this is the way it worked back in those days. They would go out for 2 or 3 days. They would go deeper into the swamp. They would mark their spot, and they would come back home, and they'd get more provisions, and they'd say, there looks like signs that animals are coming from somewhere. In other words, the deer would be in the low water prairies, and they were coming from somewhere. They were living somewhere. So the hunters would keep going deeper into the swamp. And they would find the islands by they would go back to their homes on the edge of the swamp, go into Folkestone, buy some spikes to put on their boots, then travel back into the swamp, which took another day, and then row 3 more days deeper into the swamp, then climb to the top of the highest tree they could find so that they could look and see where the pine trees were. Why the pine trees? Because the pine trees would tell you that there is solid ground there. The pine trees only grew on the solid ground. So they knew that there was an island there, but they could see it like a mile away. All of this took time. And so once they would get there and hunt on that island, which was like a 5-day, 10-day trek sometimes from their home base on the edge of the island, they would set up a camp. Months later, some other group of guys would come in from other parts of the country, find the camp, and tear it up. It's just petty. It's silly to me. But it's disappointing. That's all. And but that is one of the great things about music. No matter if you tore up the camp or if you set the camp up, music will unify everybody, and for a short moment will make everybody, or can encourage everyone to realize what we all have in common. And the way we can do that is because everybody loves a good beat, everybody loves that. No matter if they set up camp or they tear it down, everybody loves that good beat, and music brings people together. So now let's speak about nature here for a second. Margot, you might not like me saying this over the airwaves, but Thurston was producing a wonderful aroma a second ago, which foretells that he might need to go outside. So Margot's going to slip away, and let me see some of these comments here. That Taylor sounds gigantic for its size. Yes, it is, and it's always been a really good sounding guitar. That's let me pick that up again. The Taylor always works well through the PA systems and that kind of thing. I don't know why. It's in need of a little repair right now, but it's still sounds good. And I bought this in early 90s from a music store in Manhattan, and I liked that it kind of looked like a classical guitar. Isn't this thing cute? They don't make these. I don't know if this is a one-off or whatever, but it's a small little body guitar, steel string, but it's proportioned just like a classical guitar. And I think they were just trying some stuff out. You know, I'm gonna stick on this for a second and play one of my Swamp Cabbage songs. Let me see if I can. This is one that kind of the Okefenokee Swamp taught me. And this is an example of how I've been influenced by the land and where I grew up, which is Jacksonville, Florida. I never forget where I grew up, no matter where I am. It doesn't matter if I'm in London or Paris or Adelaide, Australia. I always think of Jacksonville, and it kind of helps me to get it. It's like my touchstone of like, be yourself, you know, play that swamp, and because that's my currency. That's what I have to offer. And Sugar House. I love, love, love playing that song, and I kind of wrote or came up with a concept for that on my old 1929 banjo, which I also bought in Jacksonville, Florida years ago, and I played that thing everywhere. I finished it on the Intercoastal Waterway out near Ponte Vedra. What do they call it? Palm Valley. And it was... So the marshes and the swamps gave me that song for sure. People are facing the prospect of losing their property. That does happen from time to time. I'm not happy about it in the Ukraine. But can you imagine just deciding we're gonna leave our house because it's likely that somebody's gonna take it from us? That would be horrific. And yet humans have been doing that to each other. I'm not endorsing anything that's going on. As a matter of fact, if I didn't have a wife and her family and my family and dogs, I'd probably be over there fighting with the Ukraine. Anyway, but and I hear that the president of the Ukraine has said, y'all come on over, we need your help. We'll give you a gun and you can go to it. But this is a song about a farmer and his family losing his land, not so much to aggressors or whatever with guns, but they just couldn't afford to keep it anymore. And I was looking at an old farmhouse in Wisconsin one winter. It was all boarded up, and I thought, whenever we're driving around these roads, it doesn't matter if we're in Soperton, Georgia, or in out in the country near Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, when you see these boarded up places and these old farms that the roofs of which have caved in, you realize they had a glory day. All of these places had a glory day. Men and women had passion to keep them going, to build them in the first place, to clear the land and all that stuff. But they fall in disrepair, and why? Because it just doesn't make sense to keep them in repair. And so this is a song that contemplates that. The day that a farmer and a farmer's wife just walked away from their home and decided to throw in the towel. This is a song that many of us can relate to because our families have either lost farmland but the irony of it is we can say, oh, that's so sad, but the irony of it is that the houses that we live on in most of our suburbs all over the place, probably the world, used to be farmland. I think even the Upper West Side in New York City was farmland at one point. For that matter, all of Manhattan was not necessarily farmland. It was probably closer to marshes, like it is in the Meadowlands. But anyway. Y'all know that. This will be the last I take of you. something that I love so much, but I can't hold on to. If this is what it feels like when the fickle hand of time leads us through our innocence and then it turns unkind. We thought nothing could affect us. We made a deal with Providence. We prayed that you'd protect us from the elements. How can I just leave you here to die on solid land? It's a matter of salvation. It's a matter of the man. Try to keep living. Try to catch the light. Try to keep giving. You'll be all right. He built you in Wisconsin back in 1922. His granddad was so fond to see it, no other state would do. He had left winter's bite on another continent, and that he had to have his northern lights was no coincidence. Well, I feel like I've betrayed you after all we've done, 'cause I will never pass you down like my father to his son. And I pray you catch a young man's eye and he paints you white again. You never know to you, old friend. Try to keep living. Try to catch the light. Try to keep giving. You'll be all right. He built you in Wisconsin back in 1922. His granddad was so fond to see no other state would do. Song called Try. I don't know about y'all, but in my family, we have farmland, and the family was built out of farmland, and things that happened there. We were prosperity ensued, and families were made. And fast forward, here I am playing the guitar for y'all. And you could say, well, that's wonderful, and then you could also say, well, that's horrible, because somewhere in that story people were exploited, and I'm sure they were. And I'm not endorsing that, but it does seem to be just the prelude to some good chapters in the book. You know, I just don't know. I'm just I'm bringing that point forward to just try to keep some balance. I'm a Libra, and I'm just, we we can we can say how evil was the story that built this country and all that stuff, but if you're going to go down that road, and I've said this before, if you're going to go down that road and saying that colonization is terrible and the slavery was awful and because or we took other people's freedom, of course it was awful. I'm not saying it wasn't, but good Lord, where at a certain point we have to start and try to make the world a better place. And some would say, well, that's easy for a white man to say. And I'm like, well, all right, for everybody, because if we're so interested in bringing things back to the way they were and kind of starting on a fresh, clean start, then let's just all give our property back to the Native Americans. How willing are you to do that? And so if you're not, then you're going to ask yourself, well, why am I not willing to do that? And that opens up a whole can of worms. We feel terrible about that story. Our country feels terrible about it. But it is our story, for better or for worse. And what I'm trying to do with delving into the spiritual music and the music of these early homesteaders is I'm trying to ask myself, what do I have in common with that story? How do I perpetuate it? What about my behavior perpetuates racism? What about my behavior perpetuates good? And I would hope that the balance is more towards the good. And I think playing this music, be it the music of the black story or the white story or whatever, it's now everybody's story. Folk music is just as much wade in the water as it is anything that Pete Seeger did. And I'm going for it all. And I feel like it's part of my story. I mean, I know that my relatives fought in the Civil War for the South. Some of them did. It's possible that my family owned slaves. Almost everybody on the block probably has somebody who is associated with that. I'm not proud of it, but it is what it is. Anyway, I'm a Southerner. Jeez, I mean, it's in the story, but I am so glad to be here and with y'all. And I'm going to play one more song that's kind of uplifting. I kind of went to a dark place there, but let me give you a couple of more quotes from. Oh, I think I held this up, but this is the Okefenokee album. I was quoting from that by Francis Harper, who was the original naturalist from the North, who came down and deciphered or passed along a lot of the stories and the songs and the music that I'm now singing and trying to give life to. But they talk about all kind of things. They talk about the cures for kidney trouble back then, and bad colds, and measles, and blood purifiers, and fevers, and all that kind of thing, and how they dealt with that back then in those days. And it's just fascinating how folks used to live and survive. Here, people getting a baptism in Billy's Lake, standing in that water. I'm just going to, the adjective primitive, as in primitive Baptist, means that they are original in their faith and practice. I always wondered what that meant. That was the definition that primitive Baptists down in that neck of the woods gave. They relished the frolics and monthly primitive Baptist church meetings. They put a premium on what some have called the inner life. Very interesting, the inner life. And they assumed that wise people cultivated that part of life as a matter of course. Think about that. These people living out in the middle of the swamp, they put a premium on what some have called the inner life. And they assumed that wise people cultivated that part of life as a matter of course. I think they assumed incorrectly because city people, their lives are so complicated, we don't do much introspection. Now, that's a generalization, but, I think you get what I'm coming from. You just, your consciousness and your awareness gets commandeered by just surviving in the world. It is important to notice that people whom society often labels nonconformists, poets and ballad singers, were not regarded as such in the Okefenokee community. Poets and ballad singers, and just about any kind of singing was called a ballad back then. Catfish, that was going somehow, I don't know why, but they called all that stuff ballads. It is important to notice that people whom society often labels nonconformist, which is now defined or exemplified by poets and ballad singers, were not regarded as such in the Okefenokee community. Poets like William Tennyson Chesser, who was the first Chesser to inhabit and claim Chesser's Island, and Hamp Mizell, stood not at the fringe but at the center of Okefenokee society. Hamp Mizell lived north of Chesser's Island, but yet would travel from island to island entertaining families out there. And these individuals, these poets and ballad singers, were considered exemplary because they had achieved a vital balance between the inner and the outer self. Fascinating. Fascinating. And my dog Thurston has not achieved his balance between the inner and outer self. He's just complaining, and we don't know what to do for him. Here's another one, and this is the way I hear it. I forgot this quote. Hollerin', I'm going to end with a holler, was the grand opera of the Okefenokee. Little has been written about this unique American music, although there have recently been revivals at Spivey's Corner, probably Spivey's Corner in North Carolina. But Hollerin' in the Swamp was very special and different. At times, a holler was spontaneous expression of sheer exuberance. At other times, it was a hunter's signal to his family that he was bound for home. And it's so interesting because we, in our parlance, in our southern parlance, we go, well, give me a holler, Give me a holler when you're ready to come, We say that. Holler at me. I mean, in modern urban black parlance, it's like holler at me, that kind of thing. And that's what it comes from. And even for my dogs, when I'm coming in the house, I'll go, yoo, woo, and that's where that comes from. It comes from people just going, yoo, that kind of thing. I'm going to play one to end it off, not to end it off, but to end this little broadcast. I've had a fun time today. I hope you have enjoyed it. And, I go out on a limb sometimes with some of my opinions. You can rebut them if you want. I won't cut you off. As a matter of fact, that'll be fine. If you want to tell me I'm crazy or missing the mark, that's fine too. Anyway, this was a holler. This little bit starts as a holler and morphs into what they call the old-fashioned songs. I'm guessing that the old-fashioned song, which is in this case called "Ain't Nobody's Business But Mine," probably came from the Mississippi Delta area, because it later was recorded on some of the Bessie Smith records, and it was recorded around the same time as a little bit before, with Alan Lomax going into Mississippi, and the blues players would play "Ain't Nobody's Business But Mine." But here it is in the Okefenokee in 1944 being described as one of the old-fashioned songs. And I'm wondering if maybe the railroad workers, the guys who laid the railroad track, the black folk in the Okefenokee, maybe brought that in. That's going to be hard to prove, but it's a little theory, and it'll be an interesting place to go if I'm able to even come close to proving that. So this starts as a holler. This was originally sung by Wade Chesser, who recently passed away. Wade was the older brother of Bill Chesser, who I'm going to interview in a couple of weeks down in Folkston. And Wade sang this when he was about 17 years old and is now forever preserved in the Library of Congress. And this is called Ain't Nobody's Business But Mine. Well, I'm going nowhere, Jack. Got an angel on my back, but it ain't nobody's business but mine. Well, I'm going to my death, 'cause no one's on my path. It ain't nobody's business but mine. No, it ain't nobody's business but mine. No, it ain't nobody's business but mine. Well, I thought upon my faults, gonna break till I get strong. And it ain't nobody's business but mine. Margot has done such a great job on the sound. I can tell she has, because she's sitting there working the knobs and she's very attentive. And what really, really aggravates me is when I play in a venue and the sound's not quite right, but Margot's actually sitting in the audience, because I know that if she were running the soundboard, it would be perfect or near perfect, because she knows what I'm looking for and what I'm after. And what I'm after in terms of the afterlife of this show is I would love it if you could pick up some music. If most of you who know me know that I have a bunch of records, but if you're new to my broadcast and just flipping through Facebook or whatever, here's my latest record. It's called Walter Parks and the Unlawful Assembly. I don't know which camera's on, but that guy. Anyway, this is something that I did with Stephen Williams. I didn't play anything off of this today, but one of the songs actually is called Georgia Rice, which is a song that I wrote about an old folk tale from the Okefenokee Swamp. There's a song on there that I co-wrote with Stan Lynch, and the rest of the songs are old, what we used to call Negro spirituals. Wade in the Water, Steal Away, Old Blind Barnabas, Amazing Grace, Early in the Morning, Follow the Drinking Gourd, and Down by the Riverside. I'm really proud of these renditions. Um, and you know, Stephen is a real go-getter. He's got so much passion to kind of get this out to people, and you know, and he's got me working on deadlines and everything, and trying to, we got to have this released by a certain time. And for a while I was like, gosh, I'm having just trouble just keeping my fingers limber, much less doing all these press releases and everything. And I did realize that, after a while, Wade in the Water, Steal Away, Amazing Grace, Early in the Morning, Down by the Riverside, Follow the Drinking Gourd. This is timeless stuff. And if we miss a deadline here or there, it's okay. These songs are going to live well beyond us. So this is all to say this record was released in 2021. It was recorded in 2020, and yet here I'm holding it, talking to you as if it's my latest release. So it's already 2 years since we've recorded this, and it's just as relevant now and new as it's gonna be when it was 10 years from now. And so I hope you pick up a copy of it. I'm so proud of it. It is an amazing collection of musicians. Stephen Williams on drums, Ada Dyer on vocal. Ada sings with Sting occasionally. Paul Frazier on bass. He plays bass with Madeleine Peru. And he's played with David Byrne. Andre Murchison, a buddy of mine from Savannah, Georgia, now living and working in New Orleans. Plays trombone. Michael Bellar on Hammond B3 and Fender Rhodes. Michael hails from Hickory, North Carolina. He probably doesn't want me talking about that, but anyway, he's my fellow Southerner in the project. And I've got a new record with Rob Curto called the Swampalachian Trail. Swampalachian Trail. We've taken all these reels and things and kind of swampified them. That's available for sale as well. And it will be out March 1st coming up, or March 4th, or the CD won't be available until it's available because I haven't approved the artwork. See, this is how it works in the DIY world. Well, we're going to have a big CD release, and it's going to be filmed, and I can't wait to release the CD. And I promise you that this will be one of the grandest CD releases that you've ever seen in your life. I promise this will probably, I mark my words. I want you to don't mark the calendar because I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'll let you know. This will be a tick-tockable moment of this CD release. I guarantee it. Margot knows what I'm thinking. So it will probably be the only thing I ever do that actually makes me famous in this world. So I'm going to sign off now. I'll see you next week, and then after that, I don't know. I've got to go back to New York and start working again. I'll be on the road. I don't know when I'll see you again, but please, if you're in the St. Louis area, get a ticket to see me next Friday night at the Focal Point. And if you're down in Jacksonville, Florida, hope to see you on March 12th at Mudville. Thank you very much. I'm Walter Parks. This is Hymns and Hollers.